There were cases of sexual violence in my high school as well, some very sad and horrible cases that I didn't quite know how to process as a high school student. And I got to university, and by my second year of university, I had joined a feminist martial arts school. I'd taken a self-defense class, and I realized I was super interested in its way of doing feminism that was super embodied and very collective and had a philosophy tied to it. I was also starting to take women's studies courses at the time, and I became aware of the sexual violence prevention program at the university I was studying at, which was the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And so I started going through their training as well. So around 19, a bunch of things kind of came together and crystallized for me around ways of figuring out what I was thinking about, what it means to respond to gendered violence in feminist ways, getting training on that, but also developing a practice. We developed a teaching collective and started offering courses the local way. There was a girls' school in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, to queer-identified folks as well, because there wasn't a lot of anti-violence education work being done at the time in that area. So that really shaped a lot of my thinking on how we might think in feminist terms about what responses to gender violence look like, but also how those can be not oriented towards more policing, basically, right, or police approaches to that. So at the time we were developing, along with so many other people working in the area, ways of thinking about more community-based responses. And that became my first book, which was on the victims' rights movement in the US. And I really came to that topic. First of all, I was trying to figure out, what is this victims' rights thing I keep hearing about? So this was the mid-1990s. This was kind of in the middle in the US in particular of a real push around the war on crime. There was a crime bill of 1994. There was a lot of public discourse about law and order, about getting tough on crime. And a lot of that talk used a lot of cases of gender violence to make the argument for more policing, right? And I had an experience with someone I knew very well at the time, whose son had been beat up one night, and she was recognizing the ways in which the police, but particularly the legal response to that, was to add charges against as it happened to be a group of younger men who had assaulted him. They kept adding charges. And she was really concerned about that. She was a self-identified feminist. She was like, I want my son to get the help he needs, but there's this attempt to really punish these young men who did that. And she was finding herself in a state of contradiction. And for me, the victims' rights movement kind of captured that, because it combined law and order forces who were using that discourse of a victim's right to determine, right, how people should be punished or what sentencing should be, and so forth. But it also was drawing on a feminist community justice framework too. I got to McGill in 2004, so I guess it's been 16 years now. This goes very fast. I wrote my book on the victims' rights movement while I was here. That came out. And I have been doing a lot of research since then, and also coming out of that work, because I write about social movements and media activism, and I draw on feminist frameworks to do that. So I've been increasingly interested in the position of the bystander and the witness as social change agents, and the ways in which our ideas of bystanders have been changing over time, and the ways in which they're increasingly thought about not as sort of passive agents, but as active agents who are uniquely positioned because of their proximity to conditions of violence and to witnessing people who have experienced violence in order to intervene, right? They're well positioned in order to do that. And it's a kind of peer-based model of that. So I've been writing over the past several years about this emergence of the bystander in social movement thinking, particularly around gender and racial violence, and have looked in particular at the ways in which folks are turning to social media tools in order to address that, and seeing things like their mobiles and apps and other tools there as ways of mobilizing a witnessing perspective on gendered and racial violence through these tools, and ways of networking them, reporting cases, often reporting outside of more official mechanisms of reporting, maybe not to the police as much as to other people who have also experienced that violence, or to organizations. So I'm super fascinated by the ways in which people are organizing around that positionality, around a kind of community-based position where one hears and sees and receives testimonials from others about violence that they have experienced, and then what they do with that, and how people are organizing around really transforming that position into a kind of political subjectivity that has agency right now to make claims about gender and racial violence, and to even do something about it. So I've been writing a lot on that. I'd say that's been my main focus. And more recently, I've been looking particularly at the proliferation of student movements against sexual violence on campus. And as a 19-year-old, having participated in that, I hear a lot of interesting echoes across these 25, 30 years at this point. A lot of shared strategies, a lot of similar problems as well in terms of making institutional change, in terms of being heard about what people are saying and testifying to on campuses about how they experience violence. One of the things I found too, because I can speak to my own campus, but I hear this on other campuses too, there's a lot of distrust right now between students and their university administrations, but also to some faculty as well. So there's a real need to build trust again with students and to repair some of those relationships. So as a researcher, I'm very clear when I talk to people or interview them, I say, I was doing similar kinds of work as you were doing when I was a student. I think there's an important history here to tell, and I'm really interested in the work you've done, right? And sharing your story as much as you want it to be shared. What I have found in talking with a lot of students is they're honestly quite grateful to be listened to, and they want to tell their stories, and they recognize how significant it is to build cultural memory around the work they're doing, because it is so hard to keep those histories alive when we know that, students are on campus maybe 3 or 4 years as undergraduates as well. They're trying to figure out what's happened before, what's worked, what hasn't worked as well. So part of it is documenting all of those strategies of what is a really powerful movement at this point as well. So part of it is trying to sort of document the work they're doing as a really important history, as something that should be known and that we should be talking about, and that we should be recognizing its significance. Also, I'm just trying to, we're doing a digital workshop with some students in a week, and partly too is like, if it's possible for us to help them document their own work for their own purposes, whether they want to share it with us or not, that will be very, very useful. Because as activists know, there's not a lot of time to sit back, reflect, and document the work we're doing. And so to provide some opportunity to do that, and to make a commitment to that. So I think that's it's interesting and it's promising to me. There's a sense of, this is my sense at least, is there's a strong sense of solidarity between students and a number of faculty as well, who've either had similar experiences on campus like I did when I was coming up, or are themselves feminists, right, or themselves activists in different movements as well, and sort of recognize the significance of this, and recognize the significance that students need support as well, and that it means a lot to students. I've had several students say how much it meant when faculty signed a letter just in support of their efforts to address things like a sexual violence policy and sexual misconduct by faculty. Like that meant an incredible deal to them. They were quite moved, actually. And those things, they seem small, but I think they're quite significant, actually. I think what we've seen since 2012, but then increasingly by 2016 and moving forward, is how big, like how connected these movements are, how networked they are, and how in the public eye they are as well. We've seen increasing media coverage. We've seen the use of a lot of things like open letters and public letters that have circulated very broadly. We're seeing like big coalitions forming, new student groups that are national in their orientation, helping folks like evaluate sexual violence policies, establish best practices. It's incredible. I think it's that. I think we're seeing that kind of the nationalizing and the internationalizing of this activism.